Welcome to the Construction Brothers Podcast. I'm your host, Tyler Campbell, and with me, like he is every week, my brother, Eddie Campbell.
What's up, Tyler?
Not much, Eddie. Well, this week we were talking about paying and getting paid, a lesson in cash flow. Dude, we're coming in hot today. Scott, I'm so sorry that you've had to deal with our technical difficulties. Our monitor just went green screen on us.
Yeah, it was kind of weird, but we got through it.
So I did a NASCAR style swap of the monitor, guys.
Yeah.
I honestly didn't time it, but I felt like it was under 30 seconds.
Legitimately, I think under a minute and a half, like from the time you get the monitor on the table.
It was pretty quick. Yeah, we've had one other monitor, that same model number monitor, go bad on us before. And it did the green screen of death on us too. So I plugged it into the other HDMI port, and here we go. So
it's that thing again.
You know, maybe we could use some relationship with Dell here to get some nice, nice swag up in this place. Hint, hint. Scott, nice to see you, man. It's good seeing you in the flesh.
Nice to see you too. I can see all of you now. While you were doing your NASCAR swap out, I only saw a portion of your elbow, a little bit of your knee. Maybe a portion of your hip, but I'll tell you, it was only about a minute and a half. You did pretty good.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. You know, I've never practiced that before. So
I don't know if we've ever told the audience, but we in 6 months of our podcasting with the current platform we use, that we didn't know there was an expand button. So everybody basically looked at our shoulder and knee for the whole episode while they were talking to us. And we had no idea. We had no idea. So if you're one of those guests, we're sorry.
Scott, you can see all of us, right? We don't need to walk you through.
I almost fell victim to that, and I figured it out about two podcasts ago myself.
It's part of our checklist. Now we're like, all right, tell them about the expand button. So yeah,
it's hilarious. I felt so bad. 6 months, and then somebody finally popped up I can only see your knee, and we went, oh no, people have just been looking at our knee this whole time.
If that's not a lesson in the feedback loop, I don't know what is. Go ahead and say something. You never know. They may not know that's a thing. So, yeah.
We wouldn't think that you're an idiot.
Lesson number 1 is solicit feedback.
That's it.
Amen.
Yes.
All right. So let's dive into cash flow, because I've got a ton of questions. But Scott, let's kick it off with you. Tell us who you are, what you do, and then a little bit on your book that you've written, because we're pretty excited to dive into that today.
Thanks, man. I appreciate you guys having me on very much. I've actually liked your show a lot. I love hearing about construction. I love the stories. You guys cover some great topics. So it was very natural for me to reach out to you, and just listening and the nature in which you guys do the podcast, I really enjoy. So one, thank you again. And I enjoy it. It's fun, and it's cool to listen to. And we're in a world where there's lots of podcasts. They're not all easy to listen to, but you want to grab the content. Yours is enjoyable and fun too. So I can see that already.
We're brothers, so we beat on each other all the time. This is not a shtick. This is real life all the time with that.
Oh yeah, no. I have a brother. We're only 14 months apart, and we're brutal to each other, and it's just fun.
Oh, yeah.
It's just the way it goes, man. It's how it goes. But
very nice.
No, my name's Scott Peper. I'm the CEO of Mobilization Funding. I'm a proud dad of 3 daughters. On top of my normal beatdown, I get just as good or a bigger one at home. So the business beatdown feels to me like a breeze and walk in the park, man. I mean, I'm living with 4 women that are now 3 are teenagers, and my wife is become who I thought was a crazy beast and the hardest person maybe to get after. She's like a walk in the park compared to what our 3 daughters are doing to us. So the business world is mild and tame to me before I go home. So it's interesting. But no, look, we're 10 and a half years into business here at Mobilization Funding. We work specifically with construction contractors. We have a very unique place in the construction world that we work both with commercial subcontractors and general contractors. Oftentimes we're financing a specific scope of work, so we can work with a commercial trade partner, or we may work with a GC that's doing self-performance on some things. And what we care most about is the overall performance of the project, because the way we tie into that, we're very much tied into the cash flow of the project and the flow of cash off the project. So it was very natural for us to just understand and learn and focus on cash flow, but also how we can do it specifically for construction. And as you guys know, and I'm sure we'll dive into, the cash flow of the construction industry is not normal. I mean, there is unlike any other industry out there. And if it was applied to other industries, we don't know how we could sure test the resiliency of those industries in a hurry. That's for sure.
Yeah, it's funny. So I'm not in construction anymore. I am, but I'm just kind of adjacent to it with a media agency, and it's hilarious to me like how similar the cash flow is to that. So I've been feeling the same way. So I'm feeling a lot of this. You sent me a message. You're like, hey, let's talk about cash flow. I'm like, dude, yes, this is something I'm feeling, and I know the construction industry is feeling it like just hand over fist every single day. So like, what are some of the things that let's talk about the problem, right? What is cash flow? What are we talking about here? Just really put some meat on the bone for us there.
I think a lot of times, and I'll focus more on construction because that's where your audience is, but you're right. Cash flow problems exist for all businesses. So, we're probably 70%, 60-70% construction, but 30% are other businesses, but they're all the same. It's the math. It's the money that you have available to you to use for expenses in your operation or capital, which therefore you need in order to generate growth or to execute the work you're on. And so some of the biggest, I think where the problem exists is just a general understanding of what is cash flow versus income versus profit versus margin. And so I always like to start with margin and profit. The profit you make, and in the construction world, that's what's on your bid sheet, right? You bid this job, you put out what your expenses are going to be, you do a great job articulating that, you get supplier quotes, you forecast your labor, you tweak it, you add some contingencies, you spend all that time and energy figuring that out. Then you go ahead and figure out some type of margin or profit onto that, and you submit your bid, and you do that over and over and over again. And some you win, some you don't. And you go and win that job, and then you'll hear somebody say, oh, I got great profit in this job. And they might. But that profit is not going to be in your business until you essentially finish the job, have had no issue. Let me rephrase that. The profit that's on your bid sheet is not really going to be in your business until the entire job's complete. You're completely bought out. You've executed it. You didn't have any extra costs. You didn't have change orders. You didn't have deducted change orders, and everything went as planned. And that doesn't mean that you're not going to have cash flow from that project in your business. It just means you don't realize that profit. And so what the difference really is cash flow is how much money do you have in a pile. I like to use this analogy of a pile. There's a pile of cash here, and you need this pile to be a certain size depending on where you are in your business so that you can use it. And that pile of cash doesn't have to be your profit. It can be lines of credit. It can be cash in the business. It can be money you infuse. It can be a term debt. But you need that pile to be a certain size, and you need to have access to enough of it to run your operational business. And in construction, your operational business exists in traditional format, which is labor and your rent and utilities and normal expenses like every business has. But then it also entails a lot more cash needs depending on the projects that you're on. If you're just drop shipping a bunch of material to a site and invoicing, well, that takes a certain amount of cash. If you're drop shipping some material, then you got to do some performance with it because maybe you're a structural steel trade, you're constructing something, you're going to have labor attached to that. You may have insurances attached to that, maybe bond premiums attached to that. All these things that you have to spend money on before you necessarily get to invoice your customer. And it's that cash source, that pile, is what you need to be able to measure against. Do you have enough? And unfortunately in construction, there's a limitation to the amount of sources that you can use to fill that pile because construction, and particularly in the trades, commercial trades, the traditional sources of financing like banks, they're not just wide open to say, hey, construction, come here. We've got a bunch of money. We'd love to lend it to you, like they are necessarily other industries, right? If we were all physicians, you know how easy it is for doctors to get money when they want to build a building or they want to open a practice? I mean, it's a piece of cake. You walk into the bank, they basically sign, and they can get whatever they need. And so there's a lack of understanding about construction cash flow with traditional finance sources that limits that access to capital for your pile. So it requires the construction industry to rely very heavily on the money that they're receiving from their customers, which is your accounts receivable essentially. And then it requires them to either raise money or use money. They got to get real crafty, you know? And so That's the problem, is the burden of access to cash from your traditional sources combined with an industry cash flow. That means you have to do all your work for a month. You invoice only once a month. Then there has to be a bunch of analysis done by your customer, their bank or their entity or the project or inspectors or God knows what else. And then after that, you get paid. And then you have to pay all of your folks too. And so that's where the issue lies, and the difference between profit and cash flow.
Well, all right. So let's dive into some of the things that people get wrong. I want to start with all right, here's problems in that. Give us an example of somebody that hasn't been using their cash flow effectively, and just kind of set the stage there. And then let's go about kind of strategically fixing some of that issue. So where do you see people go wrong the most in the nuts and bolts of cash flow?
The biggest mistake we see is people living out of your checkbook. There's a difference between your balance in your checkbook and your book balance. And book balance is, checks that are written off. If you're just using your checking account and the statement balance, that's where you're going to run into a lot of problems, because that is the amount of cash you may have on hand, but you need to be able to forecast that out. So that's biggest mistake number one. The second mistake is you don't have accurate financial statements that you're working off of on at least a monthly basis. And that would be your income statement and your balance sheet, and understanding the differences between those. But moreover, in a construction business, you really need to be looking at your cash flow and your forecasted cash flow on a weekly basis, if not even daily, depending on where you are in your business and the amount of cash you have. And it's that weekly cash flow that you're managing, that report, and we call it we call it project cash flow sheet if you're using it for a specific project. But that same project cash flow sheet that you would have for each of your projects also needs to materialize itself into a 13-week cash flow for your business. A 13-week cash flow for a business gives you a chance to look at where those monies are coming in and where you need those dollars for. And so what I like to look at it like, you may have a $100,000 average balance in your account, and today, let's just say you have $100,000 in your account. That $100,000 today has a different use, or what you need to use it for has to be different than the $100,000 that might be in there next week. And so oftentimes what I see happen in the construction world is money comes in all of a sudden. You look at what the top 5, 6, 7 things are that are causing you the most amount of stress. Who's typically, maybe it's payroll, and then it's who's calling you the loudest, who's yelling at you, who do you need, and you just spend all that money down. And then you wait for the next chunk to come in and you spend it all down. And what that's doing is it's creating a lot of anxiety and angst inside your business, which hurts you from your ability to stay on top of the business and think. And so what a 13-week cash flow does for you is it empowers you with all the information that you need to know exactly how you're going to use the dollars that you have in the account and for what uses. And you also know what dollars you have coming in and what those specific uses are going to be. So for example, if you have $100,000 in that account today, you need to use $80,000 of that for each of the next 3 weeks payroll, because the next check you have coming in is not for 3 weeks, and you have to make your payroll. So you really only have $20,000 of that 100 that you can use for something else. And that might be rent or insurance. So even though you have a supplier calling on you, and even though those are needed, you have to find an alternative use or source to pay that supplier. It can't be the current $100,000 pile of cash you have now. And that 13-week cash flow is what's going to give you the ability to make those decisions effectively and accurately, and empower you to understand where you can navigate from there.
So we're staying out ahead of the expenses that are coming, rather than just taking what comes at us. I mean, this is good project management, right? We're trying to look at tomorrow, not at just what is there today. So, I mean, cash flow can eat you. This is one of the leading causes of like people going bankrupt. It's not necessarily not having the work and then just running out and everything going flop. There are a lot of companies out there that get this cash flow thing wrong and go kaput over cash flow.
Mm-hmm.
Have you seen and heard that a lot through the construction industry? Like, how urgent is this for a construction company?
This is extremely urgent, and it's more so for construction than any other, because you hit the nail on the head. Most businesses go out of business because of cash flow. It's not necessarily that they're unprofitable or that they do something wrong or bad. It's really that those things lead to bad cash flow, and then they just run out of sources of cash to stay alive. But it's cash flow that brings them down. And to your point about being proactive instead of reactive, it's that management of the cash flow that helps keep you away from the problems. And the sad part about cash flow and going bankrupt, for example, is that usually it's a great business that does great work and they grow too fast. You take on those extra projects. You're doing a great job, so you're offered more. And of course, when you're offered more, you want to take that. You have a great customer, they have another project, you're like, great, I'm going to grow with them. And it's that point in time, whereas if you don't forecast how you're going to manage that growth, have the ability to say no, or yes, but I need from you these things in order to run it, then that's where your performance fails. And so all of a sudden you have this great performing business that's operating really well. They have the opportunity to grow because they're being rewarded for great performance, but then they don't make that transition to understand what do they need to do to perform at that same level as they go up a level in size of business or size of project or number of projects. And that's where you usually see the problems occur.
Size of projects is a big one that I'm noticing too. It's like, I put in a quote for a larger project and I'm like, oh gosh, now I've got to flow that because my expenses are now so much more on this. And so people get really, really hungry too quick. And I think that's a really important point, is that you're growing too fast, right? It's okay to take on smaller jobs. It's actually helping establish a good foundation when you're getting started.
Something we should think about is the order in which things come. So, I mean, I sell something, and then what's the first thing I'm going to get? I'm not going to get the money from the sale first. I'm going to get the expenses from the sale first in construction. Isn't that, I mean, that's how we function. That's basically how the thing happens.
Right.
Is I'm going to have to pay my subs and vendors. I'm going to have to pay my payroll, or the people are going to quit showing up on site. The subs aren't going to come back. I'm not going to get to use them on the next one. The vendors aren't going to send the widgets anymore.
Yeah.
Like, I've got to stay out ahead of that enough to continue this process with project A, but then I've got project B that grew a little bit more, and project C that grew a little bit more, and I start realizing more expenses than I am cash incoming, and that's a problem.
Well, you can hit $300,000 in expenses like that, like super, super quick.
Or $3 million.
Or $3 million.
Or, yes,
on up, right?
Yes.
Yeah, that will eat you. That will eat you if you don't plan for that.
Right.
Paying and getting paid is kind of how we've framed this up, right? Because I think that, I mean, maybe that's just in very plain vernacular what we kind of care about. I'm curious, like, if I'm doing a good job with my 13-week outlook and I start that process, do you have any advisement for like the pile? Like, whether I'm going to some source to get that lent to me, or whether I have that in just like cash I'm retaining, like, what's your advisement on the actual size of the pile that I need, and how do I get at that?
It's a great question, because, the size of the pile, by nature, you're like, I just want to hoard the cash and keep as much as I can. And that's not necessarily good either. On the flip side, you only have so many sources you can go to, right? Like, it's not like we talked about in the beginning, it's not like the bank's sitting there saying, hey, come lend as much as you need, just show me what work you have. So part of the issue is you got to figure out how much cash you actually have access to and understand where those sources are going to come from. And then you can decide, what size projects can I actually work on? Am I really just a $500,000 maximum project right now because that's what I can handle? If I take $1 million project, what terms do I need in order to be able to execute that? And so, to give you an example, if you're doing a good job, let's just say you're a $3-4 million business, and that's made up of projects that exist between $100,000 and $500,000. And because you're doing such a good job there, you're offered $1 million job. And really, it's quite frankly, it's no different. Instead of a 10,000 square foot space, maybe it's a 30,000 square foot space, but it's the same work. I mean, you tackle it one day at a time. But because you mentioned expenses come first, that includes labor. That's a weekly expense. That includes supplies. That might be a monthly expense, but instead of the supply costs associated to a $500,000 job, the supply costs associated to $1 million job is twice as big typically, right? And so maybe you have to go to your GC at that point and say, hey, look, I'd love to do this job. I can execute it, but I'm going to need either money up front to do that. I'm going to need to be able to joint check some of my materials. I'm going to need to bill every 2 weeks instead of every month. And the GC may say, no, I can't do that. And then you know, okay, great. Well, I can't do the $1 million job then yet. I need to get through some more $500,000 jobs. Maybe that's year 3 of my business or year 4 of my business when I have enough retained earnings where I can support that level of job instead of the $500,000 one. And so those are the types of things that you need to understand about each project that's critical to making that decision up front. And that, you know, back to your question, Tyler, originally is what biggest mistakes do people make is all of what we just talked about that you don't even think about. Because you do the jobs one day at a time, 1 week, 1 month at a time, you don't really realize those issues and problems that could arise in that exact example until you're living in it. And so a project cash flow tool, you know, and what we use to actually analyze the loans we make, we realized that tool was so powerful because, foolishly, we should have known this, but it's not what is traditionally utilized by your normal trade contractor or even a general contractor as they go to execute. So 2 things that we learned. 1, contractors are very good at bidding the jobs. They have a process. They might bid it wrong. They might miss a cost, but they have a process for which they follow to do that. And the second thing is they know how to execute that over a work schedule. They know what the schedule is going to be. It's going to be a 6-month job, 8-month job, 4-week job. But the third piece that's the most critical that most folks don't do, where the biggest mistakes lie, is okay, how much of these expenses that I've now put on my bid do I have to actually invest into this project before I start receiving money from the project? And when and how much do I need to invest in it between the start of the job and when the project actually is cash flow positive? They don't know that. So if you have a $1 million job, for example, and there's $800,000 of cost, do you have to put all $800,000 into that before you actually are cash flow positive? Or do you only need to invest $200,000 into that before you're cash flow positive? And every job's different. You guys know this as well as anybody, but there's no 2 construction sites that are exactly the same, even in the same trade, right? So, you know, and that determines when do you get paid. You know, if you're paid in 30, we'll have 30-day terms. Okay, great. What if you don't get paid in 30 days? What if it actually is 30-day terms, but you're paid in 45 because it's just the way it is? Okay, well, that might change. How much of that money do I need to invest? And you want to know that in advance. And so that project cash flow tool, whatever format you want to use, you need to know that information so you can see where those cash flow gaps are. And then you know how much of that pile, to your question before, Eddie, how much of a pile do I need to just execute this specific job? And what are my options for being able to get to that pile? And knowing that in advance before you start the job is so critical. And the construction contractors that we know or we've seen, and that goes whether we've lent to them or not, when you give construction contractors the information they need, they're very resilient. They can make amazing decisions with it. It's usually they have to make decisions absent information, which is hard for anybody to do. So when they're given the information and the tools and you say, hey, look, you have a $40,000 cash flow gap in week 5 for payroll, and your suppliers need $150,000 cash flow gap week 8, they know how to go fix that. They might go negotiate with the supplier or they'll manage cash accordingly. And so those are the types of things that really need to be done, and that project cash flow tool can help you because you need to know how big that pile is before you start every job.
This is so important, and I'm living this in a way now with some of the work that I'm doing. I did not understand the terms of payment before I took on the job. I didn't ask enough questions, in other words. I think what happens is that so often we get these really big eyes over like, that's a big number. Heck yeah, I want to go do that project. And we, as a result, we kind of turn our brains off instead of thinking for a second and saying, okay, that's fine. That's a good pile of money over there that I could go get. Great. But I need to think through, what about my payment terms? Like, is this a 45-day thing? Is this a 90-day thing? What's this company say that they're going to do? Do I need to negotiate that up front and say, listen, before I get started, I need to have at least half up front, or however that's going to work? And I think I'm living this the hard way, and luckily I've got some buffer in there already, but I'm realizing this the hard way. So just all of this to say, guys, like, this is super important if you're running a business. Don't let this pass by, because it will wreck you. If you get behind the 8 ball on this can run you into the ground. And luckily enough, I'm living the experience now, and I'm making it through. But at the same time, it's like, man, I really wish I had heard those words before I took on the project, because I would have asked a few more questions, and I'd have been able to plan a little bit more accordingly, and paying my subcontractors and all of these different things that are going into this specific project.
And where that shows up too, Tyler, is where you might say, okay, if you're working on for customers that pay you in 60 days, then maybe you need to bid that at 6 points of margin higher, right? You need more profit on it, because you need to go borrow that money, and it's going to cost you something, right? Someone might say, oh, you're bidding this so high, you got so much profit in this. Well, you might not, because a 60-day term job is less profitable in theory than a 30-day job if you're not paying for all those expenses yourself, if you're not just flush with cash. Even if you are flush with cash, you might want to use that cash on something else. There's opportunity cost in your business and how you use it. So you need to think about those things, and those are the types of decisions you make. You might bid those jobs at a better margin or a higher margin and still make less money. A lot of times I think folks think about what price they need to be at to win it, and not necessarily consider what price do they need to be at win it, but yet be still profitable for me. Because all three of us could be in the same, we could all be competing, we could all be, structural steel or site contractors competing for the same job. But Eddie might be able to do that job and bid it at a 12% margin and be more profitable than me bidding it at 20. And why is that? Well, why is that? Is because my cost structure might be different than Eddie's. Eddie might have had a much better run. They'll pretend he might be 10 years farther down in business than me and been very disciplined those 10 years and worked and put all of his profits into his retained earnings, not had any bad projects hurt him. And so he's able to do that work at a less margin, but yet be more profitable. And if I'm trying to compete with Eddie to do the work he's doing without understanding that my cost structures may be different, that I'm committing, suicide competing with Eddie, because God forbid I actually win a job, I'm going to go out of business. And it's important to know that, but I think everybody else focuses on what price do I need. It's what price do you need that you can effectively do the work with your own cost structure. And that's all that matters really at the end of the day.
It's like the snowball's running down one side of the hill or the other. And it's like that snowball's running down the profitable side, hopefully picking up steam, or it's running down that other side where you're actually losing ground. Mm-hmm. And that's that dangerous side we don't want to be on. Like, we want to make responsible decisions about retained earnings and what we want to do with those and how much we feel like we want to have on hand and how we want to leverage those things. But what we don't want on the flip side of that is to start getting behind that 8 ball, allow that snowball to just keep picking up, and then eventually just run over us. Mm-hmm. And that's where we go out of business. So, and I have to go back to the pay durations, because this is something that I feel like people are really struggling with in construction now. As companies try to cash flow, and as we see, maybe the subcontractor realm financing more of construction, as those things that pay when paid, or pay if paid, gets pushed down to that sub level. The 60-day, the 90-day, the 6-month turn on payment, it can kill you. And I don't know what you've seen, but we've seen that larger projects actually have more of a capacity to be a long pay thing than a smaller project. I know both have the capacity, but do you have any experience with that? Like we've just seen larger clients having a hard time, getting that money released.
Well, there's more red tape.
There is.
There's
more bureaucracy, more of that, I got to get the pay app. I got to get compliant. I got it. Like I've got all these things I got to do. And if I don't, they don't mind if you go back to the back of the line until the 20th of the next month. Mm-hmm. Does that match up, or is that, am I just...
No, it's true. And I use the analogy, if you're out in the water on a boat and you need to spin around quick and go the other way. If you're in a 20-foot boat, you do that pretty quick. If you're in a 40-foot boat, you can still do it pretty quick, but it takes a little longer. Well, if you're in a cruise ship, we better signal that thing right now, like for a couple days from now, right? And so the bigger projects are kind of like a cruise ship. It takes longer to move. Everything takes longer. It takes longer to get from one end to the other, just like the cash flow. It takes longer to go submit your pay app and go all the way from the back of the boat to the front of the boat, and then from the front of the boat down to the back. It just takes longer. And so you need to know those type of things. And the reason for that is there's more humans involved, right? And that's not me saying you should go to, artificial intelligence. What I'm saying is you have a bigger project, there's more people. There's more people that need to make decisions. There's multiple GCs on a large project, and that comes across different ways. But even if you're just working with the same general contractor on a bigger project, how they're financing it matters. What bank they're using. Maybe it's so big that they're using multiple banks, and so there's multiple banks that have to approve those pay apps to make sure they're within their parameters. All that stuff takes time. And so I think that's why you're seeing that. It's also like when you were on a small little project that I say little, but let's just say it's a interior tenant build out, right? They might move pretty quick. Well, why is that? One, the tenant wants to move in. The landlord wants the tenant to move in. So money moves a lot faster, right? Because everybody's in alignment. On a big construction project, the bank, the developer, the company, the GC, the subs, they're not all in the same alignment, right? Not everybody is fixated on getting that tenant moved in, so to speak, if that makes sense.
We spoke recently about the problem of projects stalling. And you mentioned earlier, like general contractors having a good idea of project schedule, but I push back a little bit on that because a lot of the early schedule that we see is nonsense.
Right.
Like those schedules aren't going to actually take place. Yeah, so everybody at the very beginning says, hey, steel's going to hit site in March. We're going to be erecting steel in March. And then, maybe we're still sitting around today twiddling our thumbs, and it's like, nope, steel is not erected yet, and I don't know when to tell you when to mobilize. If I was counting on that, if I was counting on that work as an erector, and I don't fill that gap, I can get myself in trouble. Mm-hmm. On the flip side, I can get myself in trouble if I don't show up on time and do the work because I'm going to, I'm going to have the ramifications.
You're waiting 6 weeks to finish out your scope so that you can submit for, pay. Like that's massive.
Well, and so there's
6 weeks sucks.
This is so difficult.
Yeah.
And it's like, cry me a river, and, dab your tears with all of that money that you have, subcontractors. But I'll be trying to figure out what contract do I sign because some of them are not so friendly. And then what job do I take? Because I really would love to make that money. But if the financing looks really bad at the top end, how much am I going to dig? I just turn a bid in and they say, I want you to do the work. And you say, well, I need to know some things about you. I need to know if you're credit worthy. I need to know if I should do this with you. And you might get met with varying attitudes about that. You got to dig. You got to know who you're dealing with and don't get wowed by that money because it could kill you.
Yeah.
You go take that and really regret it later.
Yeah. You made a great point. The schedule thing, right? When I said the bid and the schedule, you can know the bid and the schedule, but you've got to ask almost every single day. The bid stays the same, but the schedule moves. And you can bid it based on a certain schedule, but you have to, that's why it's so important to have that cash flow, because the next thing we do is, okay, what if this job turns into a 10-month project? What happens? And it's only supposed to be 7. What if there's contractors here in Florida. What if there's a hurricane? What happens? What if there's a design and engineering flaw? What happens if, you play those couple games and you move the cash flow around, you can quickly realize, okay, well, these are unlikely things to happen. These are likely things that can happen. And these likely things that can happen, I can still run this project effectively with the contingencies I've built in. And contingencies don't just mean cost, they might mean time, right? And so it's important to look at those items because you're right, the schedule changes all the time. And one of the things you do with those project cash flow schedules or your 13-week cash flow is as you move those weeks every week and you complete one, it becomes an actual. And then you reforecast out the rest and it just automatically can set that up for you. And it's those critical junctures you're looking at that can help you manage through those exact scenarios. Because you're right, Eddie, you plan for putting $1 million worth of steel on the ground in March, and you're the general contractor and it doesn't show up, that's a cascade of a lot of different issues you got to manage through. If you're the steel contractor and you're planning for that to be on there in March and your supplier fails and it doesn't get there, well, two things. You're going to have a bunch of manpower that you were allocated to a job that is useless. That means you're going to now be paying that payroll, which is now a cost of that project without you effectively being able to bill for it in that same time frame. You also have a frustrated customer, your general contractor, who's going to send some heat downhill, right? They're going to be a little frustrated too. What I can tell you being sitting in the middle, when there's not material on a site fast enough, with the exceptions of some dramatic issues that we've all dealt with recently, it's because of cash, man. They just didn't order it on time. But why didn't they order on time? Because they didn't have the money to pay for it in the terms they did. Or they were getting terms for it, but they're behind on the 3 other projects from the same supplier, and they don't want to release it till they get payment. So they're waiting on another project's payment. And it's important for everyone to let's just all have a realistic conversation because that's how it goes. Like you can have the best balance sheet as a general contractor and the best balance sheet financial capability as a subcontractor. But at the end of the day, the money for how everyone's going to get paid is however the project's getting financed. And if that project isn't releasing money quick enough, eventually there's going to be a problem for everybody. Even if you have the money, it doesn't mean you're just going to give it to the project owner because they want to be slow or their bank wants to be slow. So it's good to have a good, honest conversation. And if you're a general contractor, you should want to say, hey, do you have the money you need to order this? Because I want to make sure this hits on the site in May. Let me know if you don't. Like create a little open environment that might get you some reality. Even if you're mad about it, you're better off knowing than finding out on May 1st it's not going to come for a month when you would have rather known, in April.
Yeah, that honesty is a major thing. I mean, you take, for example, a steel fabricator that's been told, I need the steel in March so that my erector can start. And that steel fabricator is ready to show up. They did everything necessary to show up, and they have fabricated materials. Well, now, because of things, and I'm not ready for you yet. I'm not ready for you yet. You can't bring it yet. I'm not ready for you yet. Well, now I've got trailers full of steel that it's taken up, some, square footage in my yard. I can't get it to you. And then there's a whole notion of, well, can I bill it? I'm like, I need to bill you for stored materials now. And so, looking at contract language for the contingencies and the things that could go wrong, I think that the mature businesses that we see, they have these things kind of written in, and they have a process for reviewing a contract and making sure they've got that covered. They're not going to allow for things they've already seen before. Like they've seen it go bad. They kind of cover those bases. The young guy that's scrappy, the new business that's just, trying to get it, whatever, might be a lot more likely to sign to their own peril.
Mm-hmm. So we've gone over the issues, right? I feel like we really understand where the pitfalls are at. I want to get into the fixes, okay? How do we fix it? Some of the tools that are out there that can help us plan better, right? So, to the young businesses, to the old businesses, like to everybody in the middle there, what are some of the tools that we can use to plan effectively on our cash flow?
You got to have a good finance mind somewhere in your business. They don't have to be an employee, but they need to be a service, at least that you pay for. And I think a lot of businesses sometimes misconstrue accounting for taxes. You need an accountant to do your taxes, but you also need an accountant that's focused on construction that can show you how to financially set up the structure of your business to give you the information and access to the information in real time so that you can do exactly what we're talking about. You have the tools and info to make the decisions you need to make. Go to the supplier, order this supplier, have that candid conversation in advance because you actually can forecast and see what's going to happen in 4 or 5 weeks if something doesn't happen. So that's the first thing. Find a good construction accountant and ask them to come in and analyze your business and set up the structural financial aspects of your business so you can see and get the information in the reports that you need and in whatever frequency you need them in. And I say a construction accountant because you can leverage off of their experience. They might work with 4, 5, 6 dozen different construction businesses that are similar to yours that are all at different sizes and levels that they can kind of share that information with you. You don't have to recreate it. And then second, if you can put a bookkeeper or controller in your business to then manage to that financial structure that's been set up by I call it the brain power, right? The brain power from the accounting group has set that up for you. Then you can hire the bookkeeper to just manage your transactions on a real-time basis so that those reports are then coming into you. I think that's the first thing you need to do is get the information. That's the first fix. Part of that is getting a project cash flow tool for each job. So we talked about that earlier. You know where your cash flow gaps are going to be, how much cash you need for each project, and then you can take each of those projects and they roll up into your business cash flow. So you're getting that report on a daily, weekly basis, and you can keep track of that with your accounts payable group or bookkeeper on where you're at all given times based on those schedule changes. And Eddie made that call perfect. You get the call any given day. You think you're starting a job next week and it gets pushed for 2 weeks for some reason. Well, if you have all those tools, you just go input those dates and you can quickly find out this is going to be a real big problem or it's going to be a small problem. Or in real time, I can go back and say, okay, Eddie, look, if we push this 2 weeks, unfortunately, this is what I'm going to need. This is what this means. And now we can work on it together. You know what I mean? And what that might mean is it might be a change order. It might mean I'm going to have to take my crews. I'm going to have to start this other job then. And I really can't be on your job for 4 weeks. So what if I need to do that, what does that mean? And then that gives Eddie the chance to say to me, oh, actually, you know what? I can't do that. Put a change order in for your 2 weeks of labor because I need this to be done. He might not want to do that, but if he's given the information, he's able to make decisions, which is great customer service for you. And it's also you being real with supported data and information to articulate that. Again, these are all things nobody wants to deal with, but you're dealing with them. They're reality. This is what happens, right? Or maybe you leverage a supplier and the determination is made by you and the general contractor. Actually, we can get the stuff here, but if we do expedited shipping, it's going to cost X. And everyone's saying, well, X, I'd much rather do that than delay it for 2 weeks. So let's just pay for the expedited shipping. You know, those are the types of things that come out of candid, real, knowledgeable information, decisions that you can then execute off of, especially in a construction project. So those are the types of things that I'm talking about, I think are the quick and best fixes. And they're easy. Find a great construction accountant, leverage their skills, have them put a financial structure in for you. You get access to reports. What I mentioned before, construction folks are very resilient. They know what to do when they're given the information. So the best fix for this is to get yourself in a situation where you can get access to the information in tools and reporting that you can then make decisions off of.
So, all right, that's great where we can hire out accounting and all that other stuff that we talked about. What about for startups? Yeah, like our cash flow is nil. Like we are just getting going. What is something that they can do to really help themselves out?
Well, a true startup is tough. I mean, you don't have any business performance that you can leverage to get financing, but you do have personal performance. So there's a lot of startups, particularly in construction. We're talking about that you're a new business, but you're not new to the business. And then, your typical, let's just take your typical mechanical engineer or plumbing or electrical HVAC, right? Your MEPs. How do most of those businesses start? Well, most of them were a trade electrician with a license doing the trade, working for some terrible leader that was either forced or it was such a bad situation they went out on their own. Or they were properly motivated, but they went out on their own. But some of them didn't want to. Next thing you know, they have this electrical business with employees and everything else. Now they're an owner. So they had the skilled trade. They know what to do. They had the initiative, the entrepreneurship to step out. But they didn't have the financial acumen to do it for them. But they can leverage their personal experience. They can say, look, I worked for 10 years at this previous company. I know exactly what I'm doing. I can do and execute this work. I led these teams at my previous 10 years of experience, and here's what I did. So you got to leverage your personal brand and knowledge to be able to do that. From a financial perspective, that can help a lender know, okay, you know what? They know what they're doing. On the other hand, you're going to need to start small. You're going to need to maybe look at how much you can get in credit from credit cards. So you can use those credit cards to help you fuel some of your growth. In some cases, you might be able to look at going to a bank and getting a signature loan. You might have very high credit. The bank may allow you to get a signature loan. Sometimes you can get 25, 50, 100 grand off of your signature alone because you've had good credit. So those are the types of things you need to look at from a personal perspective. Next, you could try to leverage an equity partner, someone that believes in you. Maybe it's friends and family that you can go lean on, that you can give you, they know you, so they know what kind of person you're going to be. You can work hard. You can leverage getting some cash from them, but put the financial discipline around how you're going to use that cash. Those are your best options in a startup sense. It's very difficult to try to raise money or go out in this venture I'm being candid about construction world. If you had a piece of tech, for example, it's a little easier to raise money and things like that. But that's what you really got to do.
More so into the cash flow planning side of things, though, like the tools of the trade. Like, is there any specific tool that we could use to help? Like, so if we raise money or we do whatever, like, how can we plan best to make sure that we're using that capital correctly?
Well, we have a free project cash flow tool on our website. It's the exact one we use. We built it for ourselves initially years ago from an underwriting perspective. But as I was saying before, when we give this out to clients or we've given out to people in our network, they've used it. So it's a great spreadsheet access tool. It's easy to use. That is the best way to possibly use ours. It's there. It's free. If not, ours isn't the only one you can use. There's plenty of cash flow tools. Ours is geared specifically for construction, and you can tab through it. It's free, doesn't cost you anything. We don't market to you. But that type of tool and information can give you the access. That's the first thing she uses. So you know what kind of money you need to execute, even just a single work order. And then there's a great 13-week cash flow tool. We also have that as a resource on our webpage. That was designed by an accounting firm that we saw. But there's other ones out there too. If you just Google 13-week cash flow or ask your accountant for a 13-week cash flow, they all should have one that they could modify or provide to you as a template that can roll up into your business. But I think you really need, in the construction world, you really need to look at them project by project because every project's different.
I know in QuickBooks, they have a small one that you can use too for planning, that sort of thing. So if you're a QuickBooks user, that could be an easy one for you to leverage as well. I don't have a ton of experience with that one, but I know it's there.
And that one's pretty good, especially if you're using the construction version of QuickBooks. It is pretty good. They'll ask you the right questions, right? Again, these reports are only as good as the information you put in them. So you want to make sure you're being asked the right questions so that the information you get into them is good. And so that's why it's good to use the construction version of that for QuickBooks, for example, or ours. We know ours was geared to set up off of your bid sheet. So everybody kind of has a good bid sheet. If you're answering questions that are already in your head off of your bid sheet and it materializes into a cash flow, at least you can kind of capture everything.
Well, Scott, this is great stuff, man. We appreciate you just kind of shedding some light on this for us and like kind of help us understand the issues and kind of some of the different ways to tackle it. I want to hit you with our megaphone question though. All right. It's our favorite question. So if we gave you a megaphone in around 60 seconds to say something the whole construction industry, what would you want to say? What would you want to leave with?
I would tell everybody to focus on performance. And despite there's too much focus on price, and we touched on this a little bit today, but what I mean by that is performance is the number one thing that can separate you from every other competitor or business. You're going to get rewarded for doing great work. You're going to be rewarded with more work. You're going to be rewarded with your customers being happy. You're going to get rewarded by your employees going home, and you're going to be rewarded financially. And so focus on what your business needs to perform. And you make that your strongest, most highest priority in your business. No matter what, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to do a kick-ass job. I'm going to do the best possible job. I'm going to make myself so undeniably great that I'm the best electrician, the best plumber, whatever your trade is on this job, that the next time that general contractor does a job, they're going to be scared to do it with someone else other than us. And even if that means they say, you know what, they're a little more expensive, but they're a little higher price, but that's good. That's good, because you making money, you having those contingencies, you being able to work around those things, and you compile and stack those wins on great performance over the course of weeks and months and project and year and year, you're going to be a great, healthy business. And that's what you're in business for anyway. And if that means you have to bid 3 times as many jobs because you're bidding them higher, so be it. Focus on bidding more jobs, but don't sacrifice the price that you need to perform at. That's the separator. You have to perform.
That's a good word, man. I like that. Well, Scott, thanks for joining us this week.
Thank you guys, man. I really appreciate the time. I really do. It was great talking to you guys. You make it very easy to communicate back and forth.